According to county ledgers, the summer of 1937 was the driest in Kansas history. Gray County lost more than 200 farms that year. Crops withered to dust. Wells cracked open like empty skulls. And the wind, always the wind, carried the topsoil east until it rained mud in Missouri. Families fled by wagon, their houses collapsing behind them. The government called it a natural disaster. Locals called it punishment. And then, in the township of Hollow Creek, something impossible happened. One field stayed green. It belonged to a widow named Eleanor Wray, age 43, whose husband had died 2 years earlier when his tractor overturned during a storm. She lived alone in a small clapboard house with a weather-beaten barn and a single well that, by all accounts, should have run dry. But her wheat kept growing tall, gold, and unblemished, while every other field around it turned to sand. Neighbors came to see it for themselves. They said the air over her land was different, heavy and still, as if the wind stopped out of respect. Some claimed the stalks bent when she passed, like a congregation bowing its head. At first, people said she was blessed. Then they said she was lucky. By autumn, they said she was cursed. Eleanor told anyone who asked that she prayed every morning before dawn, facing east, so the sun could hear her better. She spoke little at church and almost never left her property. A local pastor, Reverend Joel Myers, described her as a devout woman, but not of the same God the rest of us follow. When he visited her farm in October, he found small bundles of wheat hanging from her porch rafters, each tied with a red thread and marked with a symbol resembling an eye inside a circle. When he asked what it meant, she smiled and said, "It keeps the wind asleep." Myers later noted in his diary that her hands smelled of iron, not soil. He also wrote that the ground beneath her boots seemed warm, as though it were breathing. By the following year, her success had turned into spectacle. While drought still ravaged the county, Eleanor's harvest doubled. She sold grain to nearby towns, donated flour to the parish, and even employed several out-of-work farmhands. Reporters from Wichita came to photograph her miracle wheat. The Kansas Daily Ledger ran a front-page headline, "The Woman Who Stopped in the Wind." The photograph shows her standing in the field at dusk, a black dress billowing around her ankles, her hand resting on a sickle. Behind her, the wheat looks alive, leaning toward her, not the camera. But within weeks of that photo's publication, one of her workers vanished. His name was Joseph Klein, a 19-year-old from Dodge City. His hat was found hanging on a fence post, and his tools were left neatly stacked by the barn. Locals assumed he'd gone west to find better pay. Eleanor told the sheriff, "Joseph finished his work. He went home." No one questioned her further. Then it happened again. Summer 1939. Thomas Greeley, a drifter who had been helping her mend fences, disappeared after the final harvest. His wages were still in an envelope on her kitchen table. That same week, her wheat yielded nearly 3 times the county average. When Reverend Myers tried to speak about it from the pulpit, half the congregation walked out. The others stayed silent. By 1940, the locals had given her a new name. They called her the Harvest Widow. County records show that between 1937 and 1945, 12 men who worked her land were reported missing. No remains were ever found. Search parties turned up nothing but animal bones and burned stumps where scarecrows once stood. The sheriff wrote in his final report, "No evidence of foul play, no graves. The ground is too dry to hold secrets." And yet, every year, when the wheat ripened, Eleanor held a solitary ritual. Neighbors saw her walking the fields at twilight, sprinkling something dark from a clay jar, humming under her breath. They said the song sounded like a lullaby. Those who listened claimed to hear a second voice, low, distant, like wind through hollow grain. When questioned later by a visiting agronomist from Topeka, she was calm. He asked how she managed such yields without irrigation. Eleanor's answer was simple. Every seed grows better when it remembers the hand that buried it. The agronomist noted that her soil contained unusually high traces of calcium and iron, more consistent with animal remains than fertilizer. His report was never filed. By the end of the 1940s, the Dust Bowl had passed, but the legend remained. Children were warned never to step onto her property after dark. Travelers spoke of hearing voices in the fields when the moon was full, and once a year, always after the first harvest, someone new would go missing. Some said the earth was collecting what it was owed. Others said Eleanor was still praying, and that the wind was still listening. By the summer of 1951, the legend of the Harvest Widow had hardened into folklore. Children whispered her name like a dare. Farmers swore that if you stood in her fields at dusk, the stalks would brush against your legs as though they were reaching for you. And yet, no one ever found proof of anything. Not until the day the wheat turned red. It began after a storm. Hail had flattened most of Gray County, but Eleanor Wray's land, as always, stood untouched, except for one patch, a perfect circle, where the wheat had darkened overnight. When the farmhands tried to reap it, the blades of their sickles came back stained with something that looked like rust. But when it dried, it wasn't rust. It was blood. The sheriff at the time, Calvin Hobbs, arrived 3 days later. His report, now preserved in the Kansas State Archive, reads like a confession. The widow met us at the gate, said we shouldn't enter without asking. I thought she meant the property. Later, I realized she meant the ground. Hobbs took samples to the county lab. Tests confirmed animal hemoglobin, possibly bovine, the report stated, but no cattle had grazed within 5 miles of her farm in years. The sheriff closed the case as inconclusive. Though his handwritten addendum adds a single line, the soil pulses when you touch it. That fall, a journalist from the Wichita Gazette, Henry Lowell, came to Hollow Creek to write what he called a human interest story about the miracle widow. His notes, found years later in a sealed evidence box, tell a different tale. Lowell interviewed 5 locals, all women over 60, all claiming they had once prayed with Eleanor. They said she spoke of the earth as a body and called the wheat its hair. When drought struck, she told them it wasn't punishment, but hunger. And every season she offered something back. She'd walk out at night, said one, with her jar and her song. Said the wind had to feed, same as us. When Lowell asked what was in the jar, they fell silent. One finally whispered, whatever it was, it came from men. The journalist never published his story. He was last seen leaving Hollow Creek on October 12, 1951. His car was found abandoned 2 miles down the road, its trunk full of wheat. Each stalk had been stripped of grain, only the stems remained, slick with a dark resin. The sheriff called it vandalism. The locals called it harvest. In 1953, the Kansas Agricultural Board sent a soil specialist, Dr. Norman Ellery, to investigate claims of unnatural fertility levels in the Hollow Creek region. His correspondence with the Bureau of Soils is clinical, almost detached until the final entry. Tested Site 4, Wray Farm. Soil density inconsistent with known composition. Metallic odor. Samples exude viscous fluid when exposed to air. Traces of calcium phosphate, human in origin. He never submitted the samples. 3 months later, Ellery was found drowned in an irrigation pond 50 miles away. His lungs contained wheat husks. After Ellery's death, the state quietly withdrew interest in Hollow Creek. The post-war boom had shifted Kansas toward industry. The old farm legends were left to rot. But the county records show something peculiar. Between 1951 and 1963, 8 more disappearances occurred, all men, all hired hands who had worked for the widow, and every missing man coincided with a record-breaking harvest. By 1960, she was in her late 60s, still living alone, still working the same land. Photographs from that decade show her thinner, almost spectral, her eyes deep-set and black. One neighbor described her as a woman who never cast a shadow the same way twice. In 1964, the Gray County Museum received an anonymous donation a small linen sack filled with dried wheat heads. Attached was a note typed on an old Remington typewriter. "For the archives, from the field that remembers." The curator, assuming it was a farming artifact, placed it in storage. 10 years later, during reclassification, a technician sliced one of the husks open and found a tooth fragment embedded inside. Dental analysis suggested it belonged to an adult male, aged 20 to 30. The sack was immediately sealed and transferred to the State Forensic Lab in Topeka. Cutting to the text, a lab burned down the following week. In the final census that listed her name, 1970, Gray County Roll, number 1186, Eleanor Wray is recorded as widowed, occupation, farmer. No date of death, no burial record. 280 seconds later, her property was purchased that same year by an agricultural cooperative and bulldozed for grain storage. The bulldozer operator, Harvey Boone, reportedly left the job site mid-shift and never returned home. His truck was found on edge of the property, headlights on, engine running. The wheat behind it had grown 6 inches overnight. When the new owners tried to plant on the same land, nothing would take root. The soil, once so fertile, had turned to a fine gray powder that blew away with the first wind. Locals said the earth was finally full. Today, all that remains of Eleanor's farm is a bare field and a rusted weather vane shaped like a woman holding a sickle. It turns only when there's no wind. Some nights, when the wheat in the neighboring fields rustles without a breeze, people still swear they hear her voice carried across the plains. Low, rhythmic, patient. "Sleep, my sons, beneath the grain. The mother will feed again." When the drought returned to western Kansas in 2003, the State Agricultural Board commissioned a series of soil studies across the old Dust Bowl counties. Most were routine, except one, a team led by Dr. Lydia Hart. An environmental biochemist from Wichita State began testing an abandoned parcel listed simply as Plot 77G, former Wray Farm. According to property records, no crops had grown there since 1970. Locals called it the sleeping field. On the second day of sampling, one of the assistants noticed something odd. The soil wasn't dry. It was damp, warm, almost oily, though the surface had seen no rain for months. When they dug deeper, they hit a layer of compacted ash mixed with brittle fragments of bone. And threaded through the sediment, like veins, ran hundreds of pale roots that pulsed faintly when light touched them. Hart collected samples and shipped them to Topeka for analysis. 2 weeks later, the laboratory phoned in confusion. The organic content showed hemoglobin, trace collagen, and human mitochondrial DNA from at least 13 distinct male donors. The report was marked preliminary, pending confirmation. The next day, the courier carrying the samples crashed on Route 50. The containers were never recovered. Unfortunately, Hart's team returned to the site with a small ground-penetrating radar. At roughly 8 feet below the surface, the scan revealed a circular anomaly, a depression consistent with a pit or chamber. The outline matched descriptions from a 1939 topographical survey of the Wray property, a structure labeled Root Cellar Number 2, long since collapsed. Inside the anomaly, radar showed vertical shafts, narrow, uniform, space like ribs. Hart recorded in her field log, "Not random, pattern deliberate, shape resembles grain silo or spine." That night, her campsite radio picked up interference, a low hum repeating every few seconds. The technicians dismissed it as wind static, but on playback, the rhythm matched a heartbeat. By late 2003, rumors spread through Gray County that the widow's field was open again. Local paper The Messenger ran a short piece titled "Old Farm, New Secrets." Within days, the state issued an immediate cease and desist order, citing hazardous soil contamination. Hart's funding was revoked. Her notes were seized by the Department of Environmental Safety. She resigned from the university 6 months later. In 2011, one of her former assistants, Evan Keller, posted several of the confiscated photographs online before they were removed. They show a ring of soil mounds arranged in a spiral, each marked by a wooden stake wrapped in red thread. The caption read only, "It's still breathing." 10 years later, in 2021, a true crime podcaster named Renee Calder rediscovered the case while researching unsolved rural disappearances. Her series, The Widow's Harvest, climbed to the top of Spotify's documentary charts within a month. Episode 3 included an audio clip never before released, Hart's original field recording from that first night in 2003. At the 10-second mark, listeners can hear a faint whisper under the static, a woman's voice saying, "Don't wake her until she's hungry." The file was analyzed by acoustic experts. They confirmed it was not a radio frequency, nor any of the team's voices. Calder ended the episode with a line that chilled her audience. "Maybe we've mistaken drought for digestion." Following the podcast's success, new attention forced the county to reopen the file. A forensic exhumation was approved under supervision of the Kansas Bureau of Investigation. In 2022, excavators uncovered what they called a subsurface ossuary. Dozens of femurs, skull fragments, and jaw bones arranged concentrically around the remnants of an antique iron sickle. Preliminary dating placed them between 1938 and 1969, the exact span of the disappearances. But the most disturbing discovery wasn't human. Embedded within the upper soil layer were wheat kernels still viable after 70 years. When planted in sterile lab conditions, the seedlings germinated normally until day 6, when their roots exuded a crimson fluid identical in composition to type O human blood. The state sealed the greenhouse. Official statement, biohazard anomaly under review. Unofficially, the samples were incinerated. Stop right there. The former Wray farm is fenced off, labeled Environmental Zone 19C. No trespassing, no photographs. Yet people still come. Locals say that after midnight, when the air is still and the combines in the distance go quiet, the field exhales, a long, slow breath that bends the nearby wheat without wind. Those who linger claim to hear her hymn, faint but clear, "Sleep, my sons, beneath the grain. The mother will feed again." Whether it's the ghost of Eleanor Wray, the echo of buried men, or simply the land remembering its hunger, no one knows. But Gray County farmers have a new superstition now. They never pray for rain on her anniversary, because sometimes the earth listens too closely. By autumn 2023, Renee Calder had become a reluctant celebrity. Her podcast, The Widow's Harvest, had turned a forgotten Kansas myth into a global true crime phenomenon. Journalists called her the new voice of Americana horror. Sponsors flooded her inbox. Streaming platforms offered adaptation rights, but Calder refused to continue the show. She said the story wasn't finished because the ground was still moving. Her final episode, recorded but never aired, was discovered months later on an encrypted drive recovered from her burned-out SUV near Dodge City. The file was titled simply, Field Notes, Interview 0. The audio begins with ambient night sounds, cicadas, a faint hum of wind turbines, and the soft crackle of handheld equipment. Then her voice, steady, professional. Location, Gray County. Former Wray Farm perimeter. 12:47 a.m. I'm here alone. The county denied my access permit again, but someone left the gate unlocked. She laughs quietly, the nervous kind of laugh that's halfway between fear and faith. If you're hearing this, it means I found what Lydia Hart found, and maybe what Eleanor left behind. The next 10 minutes are ambient, footsteps through wheat, the crunch of dry soil. Then, faintly, another voice, a woman's. It's soft, rhythmic, almost maternal, as though speaking directly into the recorder mic. The seed remembers the hand that buries it. Calder gasps. Her voice shakes. Who's there? Are you real? Silence. Then, from a distance, a single bell chime. The recording ends abruptly. When the state police recovered the file, forensic analysis found something else layered beneath the static. a heartbeat, low and consistent, synchronized with the pulsing hum noted in Dr. Hart's 2003 data. Audio specialists determined it wasn't Calder's own pulse. It was coming from the ground. 3 weeks after her disappearance, a local farmer named Jonas Pratt reported seeing lights in the field, small bluish orbs moving in slow circles over the soil. He told investigators, "Looked like lanterns held low, but they weren't walking. They were swaying, like stalks in a breeze." When deputies searched the area, they found fresh footprints, a woman's, barefoot, leading from the road into the center of the old field. The trail stopped at a depression in the earth roughly 6 feet wide. Inside it, Calder's recorder, still warm, still blinking red. The dirt smelled faintly of iron. A break in January 2024, the Wichita Tribune published a feature titled "The Harvest Widow Reawakens." It quoted unnamed state officials claiming that anomalous seismic activity had been detected beneath the former Wray property, rhythmic vibrations occurring at intervals of 9 seconds, lasting for hours at a time. When questioned, a Kansas Geological Survey spokesman dismissed it as equipment malfunction. Privately, one technician told a reporter, "We've seen tremors before, but tremors don't breathe." Soon after Calder's vanishing, her unfinished research surfaced online, dozens of scanned letters and photographs she'd collected from the descendants of Hollow Creek families. Among them, one image stood out, a black and white photo dated 1938. It showed Eleanor Wray standing beside her wheat field, holding a child by the hand. But county birth records confirm she never had children, and closer inspection revealed something unsettling. The child's legs ended in roots. Digital analysts initially called it a photographic defect, but spectral imaging of the original print revealed no manipulation. The emulsion beneath the roots contained organic residue, cellulose and trace iron. Unpack, in April 2024, a private research collective calling itself the Agrarian Archives began investigating the case independently. They released an interim report under Creative Commons, summarizing their findings. The legend of the Harvest Widow demonstrates a recurring motif in American rural folklore, the conflation of motherhood, land, and sacrifice. However, multiple forensic anomalies suggest that the Hollow Creek events cannot be dismissed as myth. DNA analysis of recovered soil, sample GC121R, matches the mitochondrial lineage of one R. Calder, indicating post-mortem transfer or burial contamination. Translation: her DNA was in the ground before she died. When pressed by journalists, a spokesperson for the collective, Dr. Etta Voss, offered a single quote: "You don't need to believe in the widow. You only need to remember that soil has memory." That phrase, "soil has memory," became a viral hashtag across social media. TikTok creators filmed experiments in their gardens, burying small objects overnight, then claiming the ground gave them back different. But amid the hysteria, something quieter spread. Reports of faint singing carried on the Kansas wind, recorded by storm chasers and truckers alike. Every clip captured the same melody, slow, mournful, with words barely audible. When reversed, the refrain formed a single phrase: "The mother keeps her sons." Experts call it pareidolia, humans hearing patterns in noise. Skeptics call it folklore. But Gray County residents know better. They've seen how the wheat leans east before sunrise, toward a sun that hasn't risen yet. They've heard the hum beneath their tractors, steady as a heartbeat, and when the harvest moon burns red, they lock their doors. Because somewhere out there, in a field that never sleeps, the widow's lullaby is still being sung. When state archivists reopened the Gray County Courthouse basement in 1989, they weren't looking for ghosts. They were cataloging old agricultural ledgers, fertilizer invoices, rainfall logs, crop yields. But in the back of a filing cabinet, behind a warped wooden drawer, they found something that didn't belong: a small, hand-stitched notebook wrapped in burlap. its cover read in faded pencil. The Book of Seed by E.W. Inside were 37 pages written in uneven script, alternating between prayers, planting instructions, and verses that read like sermons. The first line set the tone. Man tills the soil, but woman remembers its breath. The archivist who found it, Helen Graves, described the pages as half Bible, half farming manual. Each entry paired a verse with an act of cultivation, seed depth, harvest date, moon phase, but beneath the technical detail ran something darker. One passage read, "The soil sleeps unless fed. It must be warmed by blood, stirred by grief, and sealed by the mother's hand." Another, "The grain that rises from sorrow will feed the faithful twice, once in flesh, once in spirit." The discovery drew quiet attention from historians. One of them, Professor Daniel Morrow, an expert in agrarian religion at the University of Nebraska, obtained permission to study the notebook. In his 1992 paper, Maternal Theology and the Rural Gothic, he called Eleanor Wray the last prophet of the Dust Bowl, arguing that her writings formed a proto-ecological faith, a blend of Christian mysticism, pagan fertility rites, and the trauma of famine. Morrow noted the recurrence of one phrase, "return to the hand." He believed it referred to Eleanor's doctrine of reciprocal creation, that every act of growth required an equal act of surrender. In her cosmology, he wrote, "Death was not punishment but payment, the tithe demanded by the living earth." But his research never reached print. Weeks after submitting his draft, Morrow died in a combine accident near Lincoln. The draft disappeared from university archives. Only one photocopy survived, preserved in Gravis's private notes. A later investigation revealed that the Book of Seed was likely written between 1938 and 1941, aligning with the peak years of the disappearances. On the final page, Eleanor had drawn a diagram, a spiral of circles, each labeled with a man's name and a date. At the center was a single word, mother. Carbon testing confirmed that the ink contained trace hemoglobin. Graves said the paper smelled faintly of copper. She never finished cataloging it. In her last interview before retiring, she told the Wichita Herald, "It wasn't written like someone losing her mind. It was written like someone following instructions." Years later, break time 220 milliseconds, fragments of the same text began appearing elsewhere, in marginal notes of local hymnals. Break time 220 milliseconds, in penciled annotations inside farming almanacs, in the archives of the First Baptist Church of Hollow Creek. Break time 380 milliseconds. The handwriting matched. Break time 380 milliseconds. Eleanor had been distributing pages of her book to parishioners, blending prayer with agricultural ritual. One recovered page, marked Sermon for the Second Harvest, reads, "When the grain ripens uneven." Break time 220 milliseconds. "Take one son to the edge of the field and bless him with ash. The mother shall claim her due and the rest shall flourish." Underneath, break time 220 milliseconds, a note. "It worked last year." By the mid-1940s, the local pastor, Reverend Joel Myers, break time 220 milliseconds, grew alarmed. His surviving correspondence with the diocese paints a picture of creeping dread. 260 milliseconds. Her followers call her the thresher. They say she carries the sickle not as a weapon but as a key, that she can open the soil like a door. He requested an excommunication proceeding. The diocese never responded. 380 milliseconds. Myers disappeared the following spring. Break time 380 milliseconds. After the flood destroyed what remained of Hollow Creek, a rescue team documented unusual carvings on the surviving church pews, spiral patterns identical to those in the Book of Seed. At the center of each spiral was a small cavity, the size of a human palm, still containing compacted dirt. Forensic soil tests decades later found calcium, iron, and traces of DNA. When re-examined in 2005, they matched no known database until compared with the remains recovered from the Wray field. A perfect match. Scholars now believe the Book of Seed wasn't merely a doctrine, It was a record of ceremony. Each circle, each name, each date corresponded to a harvest and a disappearance. And every page ended the same way: "The field remembers what the church forgets." That single line became the motto of modern occult historians. Tattooed on wrists, printed on protest banners, whispered in podcasts, because it captures the essence of Eleanor's faith, that divinity lies not above, but below, not in heaven, but in the loam. Today, the book remains locked in climate storage at the Kansas Historical Society. Public access is denied, but rumor says that on humid days, the glass fogs from the inside, as if the paper still breathes. And maybe that's all the proof anyone needs, that something planted in Gray County never stopped growing. According to the few surviving residents of Hollow Creek, the summer of 1949 began like any other. Heat shimmering over the plains, locusts thick enough to dim the sun. But on Eleanor Wray's farm, the wheat ripened 2 months early. It glowed amber even under clouded skies. Neighbors said she stopped coming to town. Her windows were boarded from the inside, her mailbox sealed shut. The only sign of life was the sound, low, rhythmic, like a heartbeat under the ground. The last person known to see her alive was Clara Morton, a local nurse sent by the county to deliver ration supplies. Her testimony, recorded in 1951, is short and clinical, but the way she phrased it still unnerves historians today. "Mrs. Wray opened the door before I knocked. Said she'd been expecting me. The house smelled of damp wheat and iron. Her skin was gray, like she'd been working underground. I asked if she was ill. She said, 'Not ill, pregnant.' I told her that was impossible. She was nearly 70. She smiled and said, 'The soil doesn't count years, dear. It only counts seasons.'" Morton's report continues. In the corner of the room stood a cradle made of willow branches. Inside was dirt. Wet. Breathing. That same week, a Kansas Power Company technician filed an outage report for the Wray property. He noted strange magnetic readings around the barn. His compass spun in circles. Beneath the floorboards, he heard dripping sounds, like rain through hollow pipes. He never finished the repair. The next morning, the wheat around the house had turned black. In the fall of 1949, the sheriff's office received a series of anonymous letters written on yellowed stationery. Break time 220 milliseconds. They were unsigned, but the handwriting matched Eleanor's public donations from the 1930s. Each letter contained a single passage from Scripture, rewritten, "For dust thou art, and unto dust thou shalt return, but the dust shall not stay empty." And at the bottom, always the same symbol, a spiral of 7 lines surrounding a crescent. The 7th and final letter arrived on September 22nd, 1949. It read, "The harvest is full, the field is hungry. I have given all the sons I could find. Tomorrow, I give myself." When the sheriff arrived the next day, the house was gone. Not burned, gone. Only a shallow depression remained, perfectly round, as if the earth had inhaled. In the center lay her sickle, half buried, its handle wrapped in hair. A forensic investigation document. A forensic investigation document. Report filed months later described the soil as unusually warm to the touch, exuding faint respiration-like vapor. Investigators found no bones, no ash, no personal effects, just wheat, short, dense, and pale, growing directly from the crater's center. Samples were sent to the state lab. Under microscope, the kernels contained not starch, but cells, epidermal tissue, human. A prosody rate is equal to officiate a burial, insisting she was lost, not dead. But locals began treating the empty field as a grave. 380 milliseconds. They left offerings of bread and milk, sometimes locks of hair. 380 milliseconds, and within a year, break time. The drought lifted. The town of Hollow Creek briefly revived. 2 wet seasons, record yields, full silos. The town of Hollow Creek briefly revived. 2 wet seasons, record yields, full silos. In 1950, a month of unending rain turned the valley into a lake. Farmhouses collapsed, livestock drowned, and the ground itself began to heave. From beneath the water, residents claimed they heard voices, not screams, but humming, like a mother soothing her children. When the rain finally stopped, we went 380 milliseconds. The water receded, and the Wray field was gone, buried under 15 feet of silt. The town evacuated soon after. By 1954, Hollow Creek ceased to exist. 180 milliseconds. 15 years later, a state geologist examining subsidence maps noted something uncanny. The collapsed basin where the farm had stood now measured exactly 9 acres. Each year, the surrounding vegetation grew outward in a perfect spiral pattern, expanding, like rings in a tree trunk. When he plotted the growth rate, it formed a rhythm. Every 9 years, one new ring. He called it a biological clock in soil form. In 1963, the letter surfaced at the First Baptist Church of Garden City. Prosody, speak. It was unsigned, but addressed to whoever tends the field. Written in perfect cursive, it read, "Do not fear the cycle. Every seed must be broken before it feeds. The mother does not take, she remembers." Forensic ink dating placed the letter at least 20 years old. The carbon content matched the soil from the Wray property. Today, historians call that note the last harvest letter. But among rural believers, the descendants of her followers, who still whisper prayers before planting, it's treated as scripture. They say it wasn't a goodbye, it was a promise. Every few years, someone claims to see her in the distance, a figure in black, walking through waves of wheat that move though the air is still. No one approaches, because everyone knows what happens to those who do. They don't disappear, they're replanted. Archival footage, 2025. Drone footage sweeps over Kansas plains. Endless fields of gold. The camera dips lower, tracing a spiral pattern invisible to the naked eye, only visible in infrared. Narrator, calm, low voice. They said she was buried here, but maybe she was planted. According to satellite data from the U.S. Geological Survey, the soil composition of the former Wray property has changed again. Sensors record microvibrations every 9 seconds, identical to the 2003 and 1971 anomalies. But this time, the pattern isn't confined to Gray County. It's spreading, east into Ford, north toward Lane. Like roots. In 2024, a team of researchers from the University of Oklahoma drilled 3 test cores around the perimeter of the sealed Zone 19C. Each sample revealed a dense sublayer of organic lattice, a honeycomb of hardened cellulose intertwined with collagen fibers. Under microscope, the structure looked biological, but not plant, not human, something in between. Lead geologist Dr. Mina Kruger described it as the closest thing to nervous tissue I've ever seen in soil. When they exposed it to light, the fibers twitched. "We all laughed at first," she said. Then it twitched again. Her team was pulled from the site 2 days later. Official reason: budget suspension. Unofficial reason: one of the researchers collapsed on the field, clutching her chest. Autopsy revealed fine traces of clay in her lungs. Footage: interview segment. Voice of Pastor Raymond Dell, local preacher, 72 years old. "My father told me about her. Said she could stop the wind. Said she prayed with dirt on her hands, not folded, just pressing it down, like she was tucking someone in. When I was a boy, we used to find little crescents carved into fence posts. They'd shine red when the sun hit them. My mama said it was sap. My daddy said it was blood." Cut to drone shot. Modern wind turbines spinning over the horizon. Wind sounds fade, replaced by something slower, almost breathing. Unprecedented rate 8%. A satellite thermiscan caught what the technicians first mistook for heat distortion. A perfect ring of temperature increase, 2 miles wide, centered exactly where the Wray homestead once stood. 380 seconds. The shape pulsed, 9 beats per minute. No seismic activity. No mechanical source. The state issued no statement, but in leaked correspondence between Department of Agriculture officials, one line stands out. If it's alive, it's growing. Unprecedented rate, 8%. Something stranger begins. Wheat fields begin to sprout small white blossoms, a mutation unseen before. Farmers report a smell of lilies, faintly metallic. When burned, the smoke leaves rust-red stains on skin. No genetic anomaly is found, but the samples carry trace human DNA. All identical. Female. Mitochondrial lineage. Eleanor Wray. Unprecedented rate, 8%. The samples carry trace human DNA. All identical. Tyrian, however, have another name for it. The breathing field. Every March, just before planting season, people gather at this fence. They leave flowers, coins, even locks of hair. Samples packing coins in people's hands. No one says her name out loud, but everyone listens. Behind her, the wheat begins to ripple through the air is still. No wind, just motion. Slow, deliberate, like inhalation. The reporter hesitates. It's like it's waiting. Archive clip recovered from Renee Calder's final recorder, cleaned for broadcast. Her voice is faint, broken, whispering through static. She isn't under us. We're inside her. A pause. Then the lullaby, clearer than ever before. Sleep, my sons. Beneath the grain, the mother will feed again. The mother will feed again. The audio cuts. But in the spectrogram analysis, technicians found something extraordinary. A harmonic structure identical to human respiration. The earth, quite literally, was breathing in rhythm with her song. The audio cuts off, but in the spectrogram analysis, audio cuts, but in the spectrogram analysis, maybe they're the same thing. Slow pan upward, the plains stretch endlessly, golden under the dusk. Lightning flickers at the horizon, but no thunder follows. Instead, that pulse, low and steady, like a heartbeat underfoot. We spend our lives trying to leave the soil behind, building cities, climbing towers, flying above it. But every breath we take comes from what she made. And one day, every breath we give back, the wind rises, wheat bends east, toward the camera. In Gray County, they say the mother never died. She just learned how to grow again. Faded to black. Sound of rustling wheat. Then a faint whisper. Closer than before. The seed remembers the hand that buried it. Silence. Then one final heartbeat.